thank you for coming to our session. And I know you're missing out on the freaky film format, but we promise this is going to be amazing. So I'm going to talk probably real fast because I have so much to say. But to introduce myself, I am a curator of moving image collections at Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester, New York. And I am an artist, I'm a filmmaker, I am a teacher, and by way of those two disciplines, I am now working with a large film collection as a preservationist, or to preserve and to curate. So I have sort of this old school approach, I guess, with the old term of curator is one who maintains and takes care of a collection. But my background is largely in exhibition and education and film production. So coming to workshops like AMIA's or coming to conferences like this and meeting professionals and sharing experiences is very, very valuable for for people like me who really learn from your stories, and so it's especially wonderful to be here and be part of this panel. I'm here today to talk about our Community Curator program. This session is going to consider the Community Curator program as a strategy for direct engagement between a regional archive and the communities it seeks to serve. We have just almost completed our first series, our first season, I guess, of Community Curator sessions, with 4 in the spring and 4 in the fall. And there's a lot of successes and pitfalls and experiences and stories I can share with you for those of you who may have similar collections or similar situations with your own regional archive. First of all, what is Visual Studies Workshop? Well, we are located in the heart of Rochester's neighborhood of the arts and only a 5-minute walk from the George Eastman Museum. VSW is a 5,000 plus square foot stone building we like to call the big dark scary castle. That houses vast collections of still and moving image media, a research center of over 25,000 volumes of books, periodicals, and other printed matter, including an independent press archive of over 2,000 volumes, historical and contemporary periodicals related to visual culture and media, an independent press through which we publish artist books called the VSW Press, small run publications by artists for over 40 years. We also published After Image, a periodical of media criticism. We have an active MFA program in visual arts, which is accredited through SUNY Brockport. We have artist studios, a photographic darkroom, a lighting studio, a media digitization center, an equipment cage, a bookstore, an auditorium, a screening room, 2 galleries for the exhibition of contemporary photographic and mixed media installation art, and a staff of 4. Full-time, we have some part-time. It's a unique place, and in 2019 we're going to be celebrating our 50-year anniversary, but chances are you have never heard of us. So allow me to tell you a little bit more. Visual Studies Workshop was founded in 1969 by photographer Nathan Lyons, who, after serving in the Korean War as a photographer, returned to the U.S. and studied photography in Alfred, New York with a photographer named John Wood. Lyons was passionate about the role of the photographer as author and about the importance of emerging vernacular forms such as the snapshot in the development of what he referred to as the authentic voice of the medium. In the late 1950s, Lyons joined the Eastman House as curator and later associate director. Throughout the 1960s, he had curated several significant exhibitions of contemporary photography, promoting the work of young artists interested in interrogating and advancing the field of photography to include vernacular forms, alternative strategies, and new ideas that would challenge the assumptions about what makes a quote-unquote good photograph. And while he was supported by the museum director Beaumont Newhall, many within traditional and conservative walls of the George Eastman House did not appreciate his expansive ideas about photography as a tool of social commentary and contemporary experimentation. So Lyons was fired. He was forced out of his position at the George Eastman Museum after clashing with the board of trustees more interested in the status quo than in creating a truly progressive place for studying and making images. At the time of his dismissal, he was about to launch a graduate program in photographic studies at the George Eastman Museum, And with the consent of Beaumont Newhall, Lyons took the program with him when he left. And here's a copy of the telegram he sent to one of the incoming students, which kind of, I'm sure that my resignation is going to no way affect our relationship with the Eastman house, so we're still on, show up. He literally moved across the street, rented a warehouse, an old carpenter's warehouse, and advised incoming students to bring a hammer so they could build it the way they wanted it to be, 1969. Identifying AMIA at the outset as a non-institution, the founding principles of the workshop were based in a progressive model meant to subvert the pedagogical practices of traditional museums and universities. Curriculum was largely self-designed by students, based in a rigorous approach of practice before theory. Students were expected to show up every day with a minimum of 50 images and to push themselves to work with multiple forms of media to interrogate and explore the potential of images while considering questions of time, material, series, and sequence. He was joined in 1971 by his wife, Joan Lyons. Joan herself, a very accomplished printmaker. Her practice included offset printing, alternative typesetting, and bookmaking. And Joan founded the BSW Press the same year as a way to promote an alternative means of production for artists to create small-run editions of their own. Integral to the approach of the workshop has been and was at the time of its founding to have a constant stream of artists and residents who would use the resources of the workshop to develop their own work, involving students in whatever way they saw fit. Students work directly with artists to make books, photographic installations, and films. And here you can see an image of photographer and filmmaker Robert Frank, who came to the workshop in 1972, worked with our students to make a film. He was actually on tour with the Rolling Stones just previous to that, making the unreleased documentary Cocksucker Blues. The result of his residency with the workshop was a 16mm experimental film portrait called About Us, which we received a grant from the NFPF to preserve and will be releasing for public circulation in 2019. It's quite a masterpiece, I hope, too. It's 48 minutes long, it's amazing. So, to give you an idea of what it was and largely still is like, this is very much still the model we follow today. At the end of the first semester, students are challenged by 4 projects: a sound performance, nonverbal theater, an exhibition, and an installation. Pretty avant-garde, yes. In 1977, we moved into these 2 buildings, 31 Prince Street, occupying 2 of the buildings on the original University of Rochester campus to include an exhibition gallery, an auditorium, artist studios, artist residency space, and collections, finally. Over the next 2 decades, the collections grew significantly as the workshop became a known repository for museums, historical societies, universities, and individual artists and collectors to donate image media that they had deemed obsolete or undesirable, including photography, lantern slides, 16mm films, videos, 35mm slides, periodical, artist books, and so forth. Our focus on the aesthetics, cultural history, and social use of images has inspired a collecting policy that encompasses both creative work and vernacular objects, as well as items that represent the history of the region. Which brings me at long last to the moving image collection. I came to VSW in 2014 as an artist in residence, and at the time, the moving image collection was housed in a not-so-perfect room that was in kind of disrepair. We had recently restored an adjacent room to be more temperature controlled and installed new shelving, at which time we could kind of reveal the collection or move the collection. So myself, as well as a few students and volunteers, physically relocated all 4,586 16mm titles and about 5,000 cans, and I became intimately involved with the collection at that point. And in doing so, I learned that this collection was not only educational films, animations, travelogues, reduction prints of features, documentaries, a few gems, mostly from the 1940s to the 1970s, but you're familiar with educational films probably from libraries. Pink scratched to some point. Not terribly rare, a few things, but not terribly rare overall. However, the magnetic collection is another story entirely. The magnetic collection has over 4,000 tapes and counting, and includes nearly every format of tape, which was produced independently by artists, activists, and collectives between 1971 and 1990. The majority of these tapes came from two sources, the Portable Channel Collective and the New York State Council of the Arts. The NYSCA tapes, New York State Council of the Arts tapes, are a mix of formats. Most of them are fascinating documents that represent the history of video and art in Western New York, which is a very rich history. Most of them were applications for funding or funding reports from artists and video collectives. Portable Channel was a Rochester-based media collective that started in 1971 by filmmaker Bonnie Sher Klein, mother of Naomi Klein, who had been a student of George Stoney's in the 60s when she came to Rochester in the late 60s to make a film portrait of the community activist Saul Alinsky's role in negotiating an agreement between Kodak and the Black Labor Union. She was blacklisted, and she went out and bought some equipment along with some friends and took it to communities, taught people how to use early tape, and then brought them the ability to not only make their own media, but to exhibit their own media in their neighborhoods. There are 910 portable channel tapes. Most of them are on open reel. We completed an entire 16mm inventory in 2016. So that's where we get the 4,586 16mm titles. We know what we have and where they are. But the magnetic collection is still going. So other than the occasional screening that was curated by faculty or students, nobody in the community had access to these films, and the collection essentially didn't serve the community it was meant to. And I had been putting on a screening of avant-garde cinema and using the collection whenever I could, but again, a strategy, we needed a way to get people, without knowing that cataloging was going to take several years, we needed to really figure out a way to engage the public, our community, with this collection. And it was around that time I went to my first AMIA in Pittsburgh in 2016. And for those of you who were there, you may remember it was right after the US election. And it was a very tough time for many of us. By and large, there was a sense of panic in the air, and every session started with an apology for talking about metadata when the world was on fire. So, but I really appreciated being at AMIA because there was some point in the middle of this conference, we just gathered as media professionals to talk about strategies for protecting and making sure the data in our collections was going to be accessible. And I came out of that experience really fired up and ready to do something in my community. So, since bringing the collection to the community was going to take a while, we decided to develop a strategy to bring the community to the collection and outline a program through which we would invite community groups with strong backgrounds in social justice to curate screenings using our film and video collection. Participants in the program will work with me and my students to research and select a full program of films that speak to the interests of their group, while opening a broader dialogue with the Rochester community. Screenings take place from 2 to 4 p.m. on Saturday afternoons in our auditorium. We design and print postcards, promote the event via web and social media, provide projectionists and tech for each screening. And thanks to funding from the NEA and NYSCA, we can give a micro grant of $350 to each community curator. Again, the goals are to empower the local community to make their own media and to give them a place to meet, for us to diversify programming and the audience, and encourage, expand awareness of local history and the current efforts of existing efforts of social justice groups in our community, while cultivating a relationship between activists, artists, and students. Internal goals, we're going to help me learn more about our collection in a meaningful way, collect metadata for cataloging at each screening. People regularly are able to inform us of what they know about that particular content. I train my students on curatorial practice, collections management, and film exhibition. And we are also expanding our methods, so digitizing more content and creating enhanced ebooks that are going to allow people to navigate our collections more in a more direct way. So basically, we conduct outreach, do orientation sessions, create a short list of titles with the community curator, and as I mentioned, we publicize the collection, the screening, and do all the projection. Oops, sorry. Our steps. Sorry, it's messy. Step one is once we've chosen a community curator to work with, they come to VSW and give us a short list of areas of interest, so gentrification or women's rights. And then we provide a list of possible titles, and they have to come often multiple times to view multiple films. So from about 15 to, we start with about 15 to 20 titles that we think might meet their needs. And it takes several weeks before they choose a final program, but then we are able to create promotional materials and do a social media push. This is an example of one of our meetings. So this is the short list that we provided, and then we go through with usually a group of from the panel to discuss which films may make a good program. This is these are the participants in the first series: Metro Justice, Planned Parenthood, Rochester Community Television, and Showing Up for Racial Justice. The program, I wish I had more time. I could tell you about each of the programs and which films they chose, but I'll just show you. These are examples of the postcards and the sort of general themes and topics that we discussed. And again, the community curator got to design how they wanted things to go. So it was a little bit outside of what I would do as a programmer, but again, it met their needs and it was their show, so we just stood by and helped and facilitated with them. So they were able to use, Planned Parenthood was able to do a fundraiser. This film was a fascinating film from 1978 by filmmaker Michelle Citron. That discusses her relationship with her mother, and it was on International Women's Day, so they used it as a fundraiser as well, which is a great outcome. Showing Up for Racial Justice chose a program to discuss racism in the media, and in between each film they did these little micro workshop kind of things to process some of the difficult material that we had been watching. Lessons learned. Not everyone has the same idea of what curator is, including myself. So I was able to really expand my definition by seeing how other people respond to this opportunity in their communities to watch a series of short films. What does it mean? How short? How long? How much? How little? But you really need to orient and educate them on why use this old pink scratched film, and films that may use terminology or represent women or people of color in a disparaging way. Well, we're holding on to these films for a reason. How do we contextualize those in considering the progress we're trying to make, and kind of process this difficult material and understand it better, and understand this is our media history. These were in our schools and libraries. So having that discussion with the community curator has been very, very important and very beneficial. There's never enough time, like right now. And follow through, follow through is absolutely crucial in cataloging and also maintaining relationships. I am so overboard, but these are some upcoming screenings that we have coming. Oops. And I thank you for your time. This is a shot from the Metro Justice group, holding hands, singing. This was our very first community curator. There was almost 200 people overall because they did their annual meeting there, and it really sort of brought me to full circle to say, yeah, this is what we want to do. We want our facility and our collections to be used so that people can join hands and sing songs and understand what the power of film and video and collections and communications and community can do in Rochester and locally and globally. So if you're ever in Rochester, don't be scared of this dark, scary castle that you do have to ring the bell to get into. We're here for you. So I would love to visit with you. Thank you very much. And next.
Greetings. Hi. So my name is Felicia Denise Render. I am the Visual Culture Archivist for the Elana History Center. I manage to provide access to our visual collections there, and that includes film, video, also photographs, architecture drawings. So any visual collection, I manage those materials. So today I want to talk about building communities around regional AV collections. Particularly, I'm going to talk about the Elana Black Archives Alliance. So for my presentation today, I'm going to discuss the founding of the Elana Black Archives Alliance. I also want to discuss our shared AV collections, our shared African American AV collections, and I also want to discuss the strengths of those collections. And finally, I'm going to discuss how the Elana Black Archives Alliance is developing community partnerships and developing different programs to share the African American history of anyone that's interested in our diverse collections. So the Elana Black Archives Alliance, we formed in 2017 by a group of Elana area archivists. We're invested in sharing our city's unique and valuable resources as wide as audience as possible. We hope to help researchers understand the landscape of Elana's African American collections. And so the Elana Black Archives Alliance is comprised of 8 institutions in the Atlanta area, and they are the Elana History Center, the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American Culture and History, the Elana University Center, Robert W. Woodruff Library, Emory University, Georgia Archives, the Georgia State University, Kennesaw State University, and Spelman College. And here is our logo and website. So our mission, we exist to enhance the visibility of our African American collections, archival collections, in order to educate and empower diverse communities. So our mission is actually twofold. We want to collaborate collaborate on better ways to preserve our resources, and also we want to make sure that we have materials to better serve researchers, either personal researchers, academic researchers, anyone interested in our materials, and anyone interested in using records of African Americans, and to encourage community members to engage and celebrate Elana's Black history. So we meet on a monthly basis as an organization to develop resources, to plan programs, and also to engage in professional fellowships with each other. So some of our shared collections strengths. So African American history in Elana is documented in each institution's strong collections of civic and political leaders. We have photojournalists and oral history resources. We also have the collections of art and art history, Black women intellectuals, Black print culture, civil rights history, education, labor history, women's clubs. We also have oral histories and film and visual collections. So now I'm just going to talk about our major AV collections at the Elana History Center. And I'm going to briefly mention AV collections for our other institutions. So for the Elana History Center, we have the Living Elana Oral History recordings from 1978 to 1982. And so these are oral history recordings from the Radio Free Georgia Broadcasting Foundation. They produced a series of 50-and-a-half-hour radio programs exploring Elana history between World War I and World War II. And each program explored prominent topics and events during the period between 1914 and 1948, and based on oral history interviews of Atlantans who were involved in those events. Okay, so the Vine City Dome Stadium Oral History recordings are recordings of members of the Vine City neighborhood in Atlanta. And so these are recordings from 1988 to 1989, and these are recordings that interviewed residents of the Vine City neighborhood that were affected by the Georgia Dome built in their neighborhood. The Voices Across the Color Line oral history recordings, these are collections of 36 interviews that were conducted during a 6-month period between 2005 and 2006. This project was funded by the Georgia Humanities Council, and the topics of this oral history recordings include desegregation of public schools, libraries and organizations, also topics of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, and among the interviews were interviews of Pearlie Dove, Portia Hardin, also interviews from Charles Black, and these interviews primarily focus on the topics of documenting Atlantans during the Civil Rights Movement in Atlanta. And lastly, the Joseph Richard Jones film from the Elana History Center's film collection. This is footage from a series of film clips from the Parade of Progress of Curate Elana. This is commissioned by Eugene M. Martin from the Elana Life Insurance Company. This is a 30-minute newsreel as an advertisement for the company. This film, Parade of Progress of Curate Elana, debuted in Atlanta in 1939. So that for the Elana University Center, we have David Robert Orr History Collection, the Interdenominational Theological Center Audiovisual Collection, and the Voter Education Project Organizational Records. The Auburn Avenue Research Library, there's the General Mills Kroger Oral History Collection for the Friends of AARL, and the Graham Washington Jackson Senior Papers. Emory University's AV collections are the Southern Regional Council with the Circle Be Unbroken, Program Files and Sound Recordings, the Pearl Clegg Papers, and the Paul Good Papers. Kennesaw State University, there's the Kennesaw State University Oral History Project, and the Georgia National Conference of Blacks in Higher Education. The Georgia Archives, there's the Law, Attorney General Films and Audio Tapes. Georgia State University collected oral histories for the Women's March on Washington, and also the Georgia Government Document Project. And Spelman College, there's the Argent Lord Collection and the Tony K. Bembara Papers. So now that I've discussed our founding, our mission, and introduce you to a few of our shared AV collections, I want to answer the question, how do we build community around AV collections? Again, it's the mission of the Atlanta Black Archives Alliance to empower communities to learn about, preserve, and tell their own stories. So ALBA has built communities through community partnerships. So the Atlanta Black Archive Alliance, we're excited to share our history with anyone that is interested in working on their dissertations, on books, film, neighborhood histories, professional communities, and also personal projects. We already have partners through the Elana Studies Symposium, Teaching Elana Studies, and Southern Spaces. Representatives of ALBA have held community workshops which demonstrated how to preserve their family treasures, such as the Friendship Baptist Church Preservation Workshop, and this workshop taught community members how to care for their church records. The group also hosted a guided conversation with faculty and Atlanta area colleges and universities on incorporating archival resources into their curriculum at the Teaching Elana Studies workshop at the Atlanta University Center. And for future articles, we plan to publish articles with Southern Spaces, which is a peer-reviewed, open access academic journal. So ALBA also are building communities through public programs. So our first open meeting was in February of this year, in February 27, 2018, and at the Auburn Avenue Research Library. So we wanted to hold our first open meeting at Auburn Avenue Research Library because this was a central location and a central public library for anyone in the community to come during Black History Month. So we had 37 people that attended this discussion and conversation, and we also had delicious refreshments, which is one of the best part about going to meetings. So we had 37 people attend this panel discussion, and we hosted 3 local users of archives to talk about their experiences. So the image on the right is our flyer that we created for our open meeting, and the image on your left is our flyer, and the image on your right are the users and the panelists for our first open meeting. Dr. Jean Bohannon from Kennesaw State University, who is then wearing the black dress there, she spoke about her ongoing digital project about the Atlanta student movement. Christy Jackson, she's a historian for the Conservancy of Historic Washington Park. She spoke about the challenges of battling gentrification through historic preservation. And Dr. Joe Perry, a professor at Georgia State University, spoke about his ongoing efforts to introduce students to archives. Another way Atlanta Black Archives Alliance is building community is through outreach and advocacy. So we meet monthly to talk about presenting at different conferences and submitting proposals. We also talk about different programs and workshops that we want to be a part of. And so far since we organized the forum in 2017, we have presented at the Georgia Archivist Annual Meeting, the Georgia Archives Symposium. We also had representatives to talk to radio hosts at the Lawson and Stacks Rock and Roll Radio Show. And this was broadcast on WREK Atlanta. And we also presented at the Georgia Archivist Annual Meeting and here. So another project that we're working on is one of our signature projects, and this is the one that I'm really most excited about because we get to use technology to help connect our African American collections. So our signature project is called a Digital Roadmap, and this digital roadmap, it's going to be, we're actually working on this project now, so this is going to be an interactive and user-friendly guide to show how our African American collections intersect. So the purpose of this project is to connect researchers to African American archival collections among our institutions. So we are in our planning and implementation phase for this multi-year project where members are pulling together all our African American archival collections related to the study of Atlanta, and also different topics like civil rights, organizations, events, education, health. So we are making note of the different collections that we have in our institutions, including making note of any of our born digital collections, our audiovisual collections, any manuscript or photograph collections. We also make a note if there's any cross categories of or any of our collections that overlap or any split collections. So we want to highlight collections from all of our member institutions for the purpose of information discovery. And we want to make sure that individuals ranging from scholars to students, so basically we want to make sure that everyone is, can use this resource across all of our city's archival holdings. So this digital resource that we're working on right now, we're going to use an open source tool to create this digital roadmap. And we plan to partner with Emory Center for Digital Scholarship to create this platform. And last, I want to mention a campaign that we held in April of this year. So we had an Indigo Campaign. And so this campaign was launched to raise funds for startup costs. So we are actually going to become a nonprofit organization. So we needed funds to necessary that's for capital and also to apply for grants. We have to become a nonprofit organization. And so we launched the campaign in this year, April of 2018, and we raised over $3,500 by 99 supporters. We raised 71% of our goal. Our goal was 5,000, so we raised 71% of our goal. And so for the donations, the different efforts, we are able to apply for nonprofit status, and this will allow us to implement our educational and outreach goals and our future projects and future workshops to work with the Elana community. So many thanks to those that donated to us for our campaign. And again, thank you again. The Atlanta Black Archives Alliance, again, our mission is to connect people to our Atlanta Black Archives and also to empower communities to learn about, preserve, and to tell our stories. This is an image here of the members of the Atlanta Black Archives Alliance, and this is after one of our meetings at the Georgia State University Special Collection Archives. So it's our hope that, and it's my hope that we will be a model for other organizations and community organizations and other archival collectives to inspire, educate, and share their own stories and their own history. And you can contact us and know that working with one of us is working with all of us. You can contact us via email. We also have a Twitter account, ATL Black Archives. And if you just want to send me an email, you can contact me at friender@elanahistoriescenter.com. Thank you.
Hello. My presentation software is different so that I don't see the time going by. So when it reaches the time, you're going to have to like something. Because,
I'll give you a 5-minute warning.
Yeah. My name is Ann Richardson, and Dennis Nyback, who is sitting in the back there. And I started Oregon Cartoon Institute here in Oregon in 2007. And the Institute does not have a big, scary castle, but our logo shows one. So I guess we aspire to that. And when we started doing events around Oregon film history, it was a smaller vision than we now possess. So I'm just going to talk a little bit first about Oregon Cartoon Institute, and then I am very happy to use my time here to tell a story about how archival film has been key to our understanding of Oregon film history. The work that archivists do, both the public archivists and the private archivists, is central to what we do. And so I'll explain that. But this is a rare opportunity for me to directly connect with people who I think are best equipped to understand this story. So I'm like, well, this will be fun. And so I'm not going to, I'll have to ask your forbearance, I'm not going to explain to you all of Oregon film history. I'm going to, I will reference films and just be like, they exist. It's what's important is I'm trying to show relationships between them. So I think you'll be patient with me to understand that I'm ordering artifacts on a shelf, sort of, and it's the order that I'm after, and you won't know so much about what's in each book, so to speak, as I rearrange them on the shelf, if that makes sense. So I think that we will start by the introduction, which is about the Institute, which is now a nonprofit, became a nonprofit last year, but when we started, it was just an impulse that Dennis and I were acting on. So we are both from Portland, and this city is one that we both returned to after living elsewhere. So this is an image of the statue of Portlandia. I don't know, I think that you are unable to see the statue where it is because they're working on the building, the Portlandia building. But Portlandia is the second largest hammered brass copper statue after Statue of Liberty in the country. And when it was brought here, there was this wonderful armada of private vessels that came out to help escort it down the river. This is just a wonderful image of how Portland acts. This is a very Portland image. It's just this enormous statue floating down the river with people on either side. It's very Portland. This is what we do. We use new media, archival film research, networking, and cross-disciplinary discussion to explore Oregon film, animation, and print cartooning history. We started with being interested in print cartooning history and animation. We expanded to film when the artists told us, you cannot tell the story of Oregon animation without telling the story of Oregon film. Sorry, not possible. So we had to expand our lens, but we kept the same name. And we have proceeded so far by partnering always for our events, because it's event-oriented. What we do is we pick a film and we build an event out of it. It's public history, it's education, it's research. And since we don't have a theater, and we don't have a school, and we don't have a museum, we find the institution that's the best match with the event, and we work with them. So it's sort of like what Felicia is talking about, in that it's a network of people working together. So here's the Oregon Cartoon Institute in session. This is who we are, people working hard. This is the city. This is Portland in 1915, and I love this photo because of what it says, today's news today. Do you see that? And then, like, what other, when, like, this is a very strange motto. Today's news today, and then it shows 5 different times. So it's like, and pick your day, you know? This kind of fluid, floating sense of what's real is very Portland. And so in 1915, one of our first projects was about an artist who arrived here in 1915. The Mel Blanc Project was our first big project. You can see it had, this is from the website, it had all different features. It was basically a 4-part lecture series, became a 5-part lecture series. It had screenings. We work a lot in partnership. This was our artist in residence, created this portrait of Mel Blanc. That was Carrie By. And, oh, sorry. I wrote this post, "No truth to the rumor Johnny Depp attending." He actually came. Because people had said to me, you know, Johnny Depp's in town to come to the Mel Blanc lectures. And I was like, oh yeah, right. It turned out to be true. He's a huge fan of Mel Blanc because he's a huge fan of Bugs Bunny. Robert Johnston is a serious academic historian who gave the final lecture, and his book, The Radical Middle Class, Populist Democracy and the Question of Capitalism in Progressive Era Portland, was about the Portland that Mel Blanc lived in. So the combination of Bugs Bunny, Johnny Depp, and Robert Johnston is kind of where we live. But what you're not seeing is that in the course of doing the project, Dennis's archive, which is huge. Dennis is a film archivist, an independent film archivist, and we had 4 different evenings of screenings of films from his archive. So that part I'm kind of like skipping over because I'm so familiar with it, but I have to remember to tell you that because you're all people who are interested in that. So the moving image is very much part of what we do. You might know the artist Harry Smith, who's an animator. He's more famous for his work as a music historian or anthologist. The anthology, what's it called? He curated a very important anthology of
American folk music.
Anthology of American. Is that what it's called?
Pretty much.
Yeah, but he was his work as a music guy is so important that some people don't know he was a filmmaker. The point of our Harry Smith events is that he was born in Oregon. So we went from talking about Mel Blanc, who's not a filmmaker, but he's a figure in American animation history, to talking about Harry Smith, who is a very much a fine art, abstract animator. On purpose, we had those 2 events to show this is the range of our history. We are in a different place than both of these other community initiatives, because instead of saying let's take the small films that are made by people in the community and make them more accessible and more visible, we're kind of doing the opposite. We're saying we have these huge artists that we're not claiming for their Oregon identity. Mel Blanc grew up in Portland. Harry Smith was born in Portland. That's the last thing that you learn about these artists. And we're saying, why? Why shouldn't we know more about the artists who have come from Portland and changed American culture? So it's odd the way that I'm doing stuff that in form is very similar, but in some ways, are very different. So when we did the Harry Smith project, this is from that project, you can tell from the image that it's an eerie image, but Harry Smith created multi-layered multimedia events, and we did the very unusual thing of recreating them the way he intended them to be screened. We had a day of lectures. This is the people who are giving presentations. Harry Smith was crazy about string figures. This is our audience. You can see it's multi-age. We bring on everything. So because Harry Smith was interested in music, we had music. This was we took the Harry Smith's film Heaven and Earth Magic on tour. This is the poster for Seattle. In our next large event was the Mid-Century Oregon Genius series. This is a poster from that series. We had This is a screenshot from one night of the series. On this stage is Matt Groening, Bill Plimpton, Lisa Groening, Ted Mahar, and Tom Schrader. And they're all there to talk about the Groening Sr., who's pictured there. That's Matt Groening's father, Homer Groening. So again, what we do is we take a film and then we build a program around it. And that's what happened in this program. And these two huge artists are part of Oregon film history, and it was our honor and privilege to bring them together on the stage to talk about Homer Groening, who influenced them both. That's Bill Plimpton, two-time Oscar nominee, and Matt Groening, 13-time Emmy Award winner.
Oh yeah, it's just you're bringing up that.
Oh, you know what? We're not even going to get to my talk. But that's all right, because you guys are seeing how great Oregon Cartoon Institute is. But this is the audience for the Homer Groening night, and in it are two, this is just a shot that someone sent me, but there's two Oscar winners in the shot. This is how huge our animation history is. Will Vinton, who's the guy with the mustache, won an Oscar in 1975, and in the back there's a white-haired woman in profile, that's Joan Gratz, and she won an Oscar in 1993. They're waiting to hear this, they're there for the Homer Groening retrospective night. We were the first people to hold a Homer Groening retrospective. It was a first. So this is an event that followed after that. This is about our print cartooning history. That's from that. So we work with artists, we work with regional historians. These are people who are deeply expert in specific figures in the history, but they are self-taught, self-trained historians, super valuable allies, academic historians, visiting experts that are deeply knowledgeable about archaic media. This is a guy who had restored a Presto 6N vinyl recording machine. This is the same recording machine that Sun Records recorded Elvis Presley on. Because Harry Smith did that kind of stuff, we had him come and he set up and he did it. We love librarians. This is our committee for the Oregon Film History Conference. And we love archivists. So that's, I guess, the end of my talk. Well, I was just getting ready to tell you all about our talk, but about what we do. It's just very interesting. So you can, if you want to know more about what we do, you can contact me. But I'm through.
Well, we have 5 minutes left, and I'm like, why don't we let her just continue? Yes. What do you want to finish? Why don't you go ahead and keep talking to round out the session? Tell us what you do.
Yeah, I should. Well, what I do is what you just saw. What happened is that as we did it, the artists turned to us and said, you aren't serious about history because you don't know X or you don't know Y. So we began thinking, we're sharing our film history kind of on a art history level. They were saying, if you're going to do this, you need to understand much, much more. And as a result of that, we became more serious about what we did. And so I will go super fast. Everybody gets to watch me go super fast. The important thing is that we always had filmmakers. We had filmmakers before Hollywood. Huge discrepancy in terms of what our strength compared to state of Washington. Here's 4 of our filmmakers, and you can see that they're from our whole state. That's James Ivory, Gus Van Sant, Bill Plimpton, and Mike Rich. They are from the 4 quadrants of the state. This is not just Portland-centric. And we have, the point of my talk was to show you that feature films ended in Portland with the coming of sound in 1926, and they returned in 1989 with Drugstore Cowboy, Gus Van Sant's feature film with Matt Dillon. And what I was going to do is explain how we found out more about this evolution. This is a frame from the last feature film made in the silent era in Portland, and from the first one, which matches that previous film in terms of being a film that had Hollywood talent, national distribution, local director, local crew. So that's from Mid-Century Oregon Genius. There's James Ivory at Mid-Century Oregon Genius. Here's another filmmaker who's been forgotten. The Olive Trees of Justice is being restored by Milestone Films. Dennis Doros is restoring this film. It's going to be in theaters maybe this spring. James Ivory told us about James Blue. So this is an example of where we are working to help James Ivory realize his dream of saying, we should know more about James Blue, James Blue. And so wonderful to have that relationship with James Ivory. And he and James Blue, they were classmates at UO. James Ivory just won his first Oscar. He's been nominated 3 times before. So that was what that event was. This is what happened during that event. Doing Mid-Century Oregon Genius transformed us from being about educating people about artists to really understanding that we had a serious history on our hands. I don't know if I can do this fast, but Homer Graining made films here in Portland. As opposed to the other filmmakers that were his contemporaries, James Blue, Harry Smith, James Ivory, he stayed here in Portland. So what happened is, by doing Mid-Century Oregon Genius, a film that had never been seen came to us from the community saying, here's a film you've never seen. And because of that, we learned that Norm Dimmick had done the sound editing on it, and that Homer Graining had to be taught filmmaking by Norm Dimmick. So then I was going to explain about how sound is part of why regional film died, because sound made everything too expensive. There's there's Homer. But Norm Dimmick turns out to have been important even earlier in 1937. This is a film that was completely lost. Dennis bought it in a secondhand store, and when we asked PGE, the company that made it, they said, that film doesn't exist. And we said, but we own it. And they said, no, it's not possible. It doesn't exist. And Dennis finally had to show it to them. So the idea is that without these privately held films, in this case a film owned by Dennis, it can be done, and a film owned by Walt Dimmick, we would not have been able to understand this one figure, because he wasn't a director, he worked on films. So I asked Will Vinton, a very important figure in Oregon film history because he started a studio here, how did you modify your home movie camera? And it's the same guy. So we have this one figure who was involved in the making of all of these films, even because Will Vinton employed Gus Van Sant. He was involved in all of these films. The point of the talk was that Norm Dimmick had ended up influencing Oregon film history in ways that were not visible without seeing films from private collections. That's the end of the talk.
Great.
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We all went on, so if you have questions, they'll be around. We can talk in the hallways and ask questions there. Thanks for coming, Rebecca.
I shouldn't have.